is Big Play Detroit. I am Chris Castellani. We got Austin Sisler on the sticks after an amazing weekend in sports, an amazing weekend in Michigan sports. I was telling Austin off the air, this is one of those things, if you can't find content after the weekend that was just had, maybe you shouldn't be in media, because this is just insane, and we got plenty to discuss. We are going to talk about the Tigers, who started their season and will begin their home season later this week. We're good for the next several weeks. We're going to have some really good episodes coming out, but we are going to start by talking about college hoops. As of the time in which we're recording this, we just saw, and nationally you guys saw it as well, one of the greatest March Madness moments of all time. UConn with a stunning last-second shot to knock off Duke. The Final Four is set, and it will include the Michigan Wolverines, who came out of this weekend 2-0, knocking off two SEC opponents, dominating both Alabama and Tennessee, beating Tennessee by 32 points. That is the most points. That's the most dominant win in a regional final by a team since 1989, when Michigan did it, in a year in which they won the national championship. Just a little eerie symmetry here. This is the second time in which Michigan and Illinois will be in the same Final Four, the last time being 1989, in which they played each other. And it's the third time since 89 that Illinois has been in this thing. Each time it's featured a team from the state of Michigan. In 05, they were there with Michigan State when UNC and Illinois were on that collision course. So just a little trivia for you. But we'll start with Michigan. And, I've talked about it in the past. There have been instances with this team where it almost becomes, I'm not going to say boring, because they win all the time. That's not boring. Redundant to talk about them, because they have played at such a consistent and high level all season. And, looking at the two games that they played over this most recent weekend, while you look at the final score and you say Michigan dominated, and they did, this is, I think, the thing that I pointed to in the early part of this season with Michigan is the way that they can beat you and how many different ways in which they can beat you. Because I know that they're both SEC opponents. Alabama and Tennessee, two drastically different opponents. With Alabama, you have a team that wants to get into a shootout, that wants to run and gun, that's going to shoot more three-pointers than any other team in the country. And in the first half of that game, Alabama was making their threes. It looked like it was going to be one of those track meets, 95 to 90 games that Michigan was going to have to figure out a way to win. Second half, defense tightened up. Alabama was not knocking down their shots. Michigan pulls away, and then they face off against a Rick Barnes-led Tennessee team with a lot of experience, third straight year in the Elite Eight. They were a team that was going to try to slow the game down, that was going to try to out-rebound you with their size, and Michigan in the first, I would say, 6 to 8 minutes of that game struggled a little bit with it. And it felt like it was turning into that rock fight that Tennessee wanted it to be. And Michigan found, I'm going to call this the Vegas gear, because it was the first time we really saw it was in that tournament in Vegas, when Michigan just steamrolled three quality opponents, because they got into one of these runs offensively where I don't know how many teams ever, I'm dead serious, could be able to stop them when they're at their best. It is ball movement that is absolutely elite. It is controlling the basketball, limiting the turnovers, spacing the floor, getting the ball to your playmakers, and whether it was Yaxel or Elliott or Roddy Gale, who's just been unbelievable this March for the second year in a row, Michigan became the unstoppable force that we've seen them be very often throughout this season. And by the time you're getting to the second half, I mean, it was a scrimmage at that point. Michigan completely dominates Tennessee. Their next opponent will be Arizona in a game that, and I don't like it when people do this. I don't like it when people do this. A game that people are kind of previewing as like, hey, this is the real national championship. I don't buy that nonsense. I will never buy that nonsense. You got to win two games, right? This is a much different vibe, admittedly, than the other two times in which I've watched Michigan play in the Final Four. In 2013, it was the first time that they'd been there in 2 decades. And I thought they could get by Syracuse. I didn't think they were better than Louisville, and they lost that national championship game. Played a heck of a game, and a lot of things went right for them. You look back on it, they probably could have won that game. 2018, I knew they were not better than Villanova, and they did not go into that Final Four as the favorite, and I think the game that they played against Villanova reflected that. I loved that Michigan team in 18, but let's be real, the bracket opened up for them a little bit. You don't apologize for it. This is different. Michigan will go into this game into this Final Four as the favorite to win the whole thing. I'm not going to talk about pressure because I don't think this team feels any pressure. For people who I was more nervous than they were. I was checking on TikTok live at about 12:30 in the morning on Sunday, and Yaxel Lendeborg, Trey McKinney, and Roddy Gale were on a TikTok live with each other with different animations where they were wearing the cowboy hats and stuff like that, just fooling around, just having fun. Like, that's how confident this team is. But it's a different vibe. And yeah, Dusty May is going to be here for a long time, hopefully, and go to many more Final Fours. But there is, similar to the football team a few years ago, there's a vibe here of like, you might not have a better shot, so you might as well get it done. Does losing in the Final Four make this season a disappointment or a failure? Absolutely not. And I hate it when people move the goalposts like that. You can make the argument this is the single greatest team in the history of Michigan basketball. And I hope that they go out next weekend and they just play loose the way they have all season because they've earned this moment. They have dominated some legitimate opponents. They didn't have a single close. Do you know how hard it is to not have a single close game in the 4 regional games you played just to get to the Final Four? It's incredible. And yeah, I mean, Dusty, I think this was already the case, but solidifies himself as one of the elite coaches of this modern age. I would say Danny Hurley right now is probably the only one that you can legitimately put ahead of him. I'm talking in 2026, all time. It's different. We look at some other coaches, Bill Self, Izzo, but this is a guy, second Final Four in 4 seasons. He took over a Michigan program that had won 8 games. They're now, they've played in the second weekend twice. They've won the Big Ten tournament last year, and now they're playing in the Final Four as a 1 seed. This is not some fluky run. This is a Michigan team that, and I think it just adds to their legacy, that won the Big Ten by 4 games in a year in which the Big Ten got 5 teams to the Elite 8. This was not some Michigan and everybody else type of conference. I mean, it was, but not because of it, and it wasn't Michigan's fault. Okay, there were a lot of good teams here, and Michigan just rolled. Unbelievable day to be a Michigan Wolverine. You could tell they're going to enjoy it, but watching Dusty in the postgame, they are determined to win those last 2 games. There is not a just grateful to be here vibe with this team. They know what they're capable of, and we spotted it as early as the Oakland game. This team's best is better than anyone's best, and hopefully they can cross the finish line. But just an unbelievable moment for these players, and I saw the media, several guys, Tony Garcia and Clayton, were posting about it, but really great moment with Will Cheddar, who was really emotional after the game, a guy who has seen his productivity over the last few years maybe dip a little bit, but has stayed at Michigan for 5 years and has gone from a team that was in the Sweet 16 to a team that won 8 games to now a team that is on the precipice of a national championship. For all the criticisms people can have about Michigan and Dusty and the way that they're running things and the way that they take advantage of this modern age of college basketball, the one thing you can't deny is that this is a group that is ridiculously fun to watch and unselfish and together. Really proud of what they've done. So happy to see them back in the Final Four. Do want to focus on Michigan State here for a second, and Austin, I will bring you in on this. Michigan State in a game against UConn where they fell behind by, golly, the first 15 minutes, they couldn't score a point, basically. I mean, they had, I think, 8 points in the first 12 minutes of the game or something like that. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but they found themselves down by a lot, double figures easily. And what you saw in the second half was a quintessential Tom Izzo tournament game. It was a grind. It was physical as hell. I thought Michigan State, I don't want to do moral victories here. I thought played their hearts out, in the final games for Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper. Actually took the lead in the second half, which seemed impossible given the fact that they couldn't make a 3-footer in the first half of that game. UConn ends up being just a little bit too much for Michigan State, who bows out in the second weekend for the second year in a row. Look, at some point, because I can tell we're already going to run long with this segment, but at some point, we're going to have a greater discussion about this. Tom Izzo, as a developer of talent and a tactician, has not changed. He's remained in the top 1 percentile of in-game coaches and pre-game coaches in this country. I'll just be real with you. I think Michigan State needs to get better players. And that doesn't mean they have bad players. Bad players do not make it to the Sweet 16 to the Elite 8, okay? Like, they've been very good, very productive. They have nothing to hang their heads about. But let's be honest, with the exception of some fluky losses like Minnesota, when Michigan State played elite teams this year, they lost to those elite teams because those elite teams had better players. They had a Yaxel Lendeborg that Michigan State just didn't have, or they had a Terrace Reed that Michigan State just didn't have. And it's going to be a very interesting offseason, because I think that if Michigan State wants to get that illustrious second championship for Tom Izzo, it's going to require them probably not being particularly loyal to some of the players that he's bringing in. And I think that's going to break his heart. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. I never see this program getting to a point where they're missing the tournament. I never see them getting to a point where they're not dangerous come March. But I think if we're talking about national championship number 2, as great of an effort as they put in some of these games, there was kind of a consistency throughout the season. This was always a really good Izzo team. It never felt like the Izzo team. So now, Austin, I'm going to pass it over to you. What do you think about this, man?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I completely agree with you. It's really hard to watch this team year in and year out because they're an absolute basketball powerhouse. I literally haven't seen Michigan State miss the tournament in my entire life, and there are very few people that can say that. But you know, they're not built the way that like Kentucky or Duke have been over the years. They don't have these lottery picks, these one and dones that are just filling up the roster every single year. They've had a couple teams with a couple players like that, most notably that 28 team that had Miles Bridges and Jaren Jackson. And they wound up losing in the second round, round of 32, which was just heartbreaking because that was probably up and down the roster the most talented team Izzo has had. In a long time, if not the most talented team he's had. I agree that he needs to bring in some better players. It'll be interesting to watch next year because he has right now the third ranked recruiting class in all of college basketball, according to 24/7 Sports. He's got 4 4-stars, 3 of which I believe are in the top 50. But you have 2 bigs in Kohler and Cooper that are leaving. They were program guys, been here all 4 years, very, very stable guys. And you're losing that now. You're going to have some young guys stepping in, whether they're freshmen or sophomore like Cam Ward or like McCullough. Obviously, you still have Jeremy Fears, but over the years, especially this year, they've also struggled with putting up a lot of points. They're great because, they can defend, they can rebound, they can get out in transition. That's how they win games. But, if you're going up against another team that can just, shoot lights out, it's going to be really hard for Michigan State to compete with teams like that. And this is the second game, this game against UConn, where they got down big, came all the way back, even took the lead, but then just didn't have enough in the end to pull that off. I brought up on one of our previous shows, that's what happened in the first game against Michigan. Michigan State even took the lead in the second half after getting down like 18 points. But the thing is they don't have a lottery pick. They don't have somebody like a Yaxel Lendeborg. They don't have this year anyways, they didn't have a super deep team. So, once you got into those final 5 minutes or so, guys that you rely on like Jeremy Fears and Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper, they were probably just way too tired to be able to continue to take over and fight for Michigan State. So, I love the way that Izzo builds these teams. I love watching these players, from year 1 to year 4. But you do have to bring in some more talent to win a national championship. And, it's really hard in this sport. There's 68 teams in the tournament, and it's not the same as, the NFL playoffs or college football playoffs or whatever you want to compare it to. So, a lot of people will say Tom Izzo isn't Mr. March because he only has, the one national championship. I think that's, ridiculous. You can debate on whether or not he's Mr. March or not. But in terms of being a great coach, I would say he's, at least over my lifetime, been the best college basketball coach that there is, even better than someone like Coach K, which I know a lot of people are going to react very strongly to. But, Coach K is undoubtedly the most successful coach in college basketball. There's no comparison. But look at the rosters that he's constructed over the years, all of the national players of the year that he's had, all of the 1-1 picks and all these things. Tom Izzo is consistently bringing in 3-star guys, walk-on guys, keeping them all 4 years, trying to develop them, and they're just consistently overachieving. Sadly, as a Michigan State fan, they just haven't had the team to wind up winning his second national championship. So, I think next year's team will be really good as well. We'll see how well they can contend with a team like Michigan or the other good teams in the Big Ten. But yeah, it stings to, wind up not at least making it to the Final Four again and seeing great players for this program like Jackson Kohler and Carson Cooper having to walk away now.
Yeah, and look, I trust his development. That's all fine. But the fact is, this is a much different age, and those really good underclassmen that you have that you believe will become something, nowadays, those guys get replaced by the really good portal pickups who are seniors that you grab for 1 or 2 years. It's just, it doesn't make what Izzo's doing wrong. It just means that there needs to be some sort of adaptation. But we will discuss more about that in the future. I would argue a successful season for Michigan State, relative to the expectations. But obviously, things have changed, and having the team in your own state be as successful as they are has something to do with that. So we will be right back for segment number 2. We will probably circle back a little bit on some college basketball stuff, but we are going to talk to Tigers. Baseball is underway for the Detroit Tigers. Had a successful series against the San Diego Padres to begin their 2026 campaign. We'll be right back. All right, we are back. Segment number 2 as we continue to roll around the mitten. Detroit Tigers began their season on the West Coast, which I think that this is purposeful now for Major League Baseball to have some of these cold weather teams start either down south or on the West Coast. And as the older I get, the more I try to pay attention to my bedtime. With that said, I'm fine with that. Okay, I don't know what the weather's going to be like this Friday when the Tigers play at home, but I'm okay starting the season on the West Coast when I look outside and there's a little bit of snow on the ground in the state of Michigan. I think Detroit is probably pretty happy with that too. And they had a very successful first series against the San Diego Padres, a Padres team that is probably trending downward a little bit given what they've lost over the last few years, but is still competitive. And Detroit pitched them very tough. Look, the first game, and I remember saying it was, you put into an AI chatbot perfect Detroit Tigers opening day 2026, it couldn't have gone any better. It was absolutely flawless. You had Scooble doing Scooble things. The first inning, you're getting hits, you're drawing walks, and then the storybook stuff, Kevin McGonigle driving into on the first pitch he sees at the big league level. The next night wins them the game, comeback victory on. I mean, look, Austin, you probably know this stuff a little bit better than I do because you played baseball. And at bat that you just salivate over. I mean, just one of those things that you look at as a true work of art. And at bat and it's so crazy to say because he was 2 now 3 games into his career. We just haven't seen that much of in Detroit. And it's not to say that this is a bad offense, but that type of hitter, the guy who's just going to grind. And I remember seeing it with the Blue Jays in the postseason last year, where it's like, man, 1 through 9, whether it's a ground out, fly out, or a home run, whatever the result, these guys are working pitchers, man. And the fact that in a lefty on lefty matchup, you got McGonigle in there against Wandy Peralta, featuring some good stuff, and always has. He's been a good pitcher for a long time in the big leagues as a reliever. Ripping that one to right field, putting the Tigers in front for good. Third game, we got a very similar version to Jack Flaherty as to what we got in the 2025 season. Some good, some bad, some command issues, some inconsistency, but I'm not really going to knock him. Look, there's this weird thing where just because the calendar goes from spring training to regular season doesn't mean that the players are still revving up. I mean, there's a reason why Scooble only threw 70 something pitches in his first outing. But look, West Coast trips, in fairness, regardless of the opponent, have had a tendency to be things that have derailed the Tigers in the past, or at the very least, they've struggled with them, whether it's going to National League parks or American League parks. I mean, prior to last year, our record on the road against the Angels was abysmal and still is really in my lifetime. But this is one of those situations where you want to tread water for a little bit. You go up now against an Arizona Diamondbacks team that started their season 0-3, very similar to the Tigers last year. They had to play the Dodgers in LA to start their season, so that's really no fun for anybody except for the Dodgers. Justin Verlander going to be making his first start on Monday night in Chase Field against Arizona. But look, yeah, I 3-game sample size. There's things I like. I think McGonigle looks great. I think Colt Keith looks excellent. I think that's a really positive sign for a guy who's been a slow starter in the first few years of his career. Nothing overly concerning other than the fact that, and they got shut out in that third game. Every time that there is a lethargic offensive performance, and this is just natural, I think, as a fan, we're going to flash back to the way last year ended and wonder, are they back? I think the ceiling for this offense is actually quite high. And we saw that in the first game against San Diego when it felt like everyone was seeing the ball properly. Wencel Perez has had a pretty good, major league career as a hitter and didn't make this team. I mean, I think it's a sign that they believe in some guys here, but there are going to be those nights where they're chasing, where they're stranding runners, where they're leaving guys on base. And we saw that against Vasquez I think I might have said Sunday, but on the Saturday game, the rare Sunday off day to begin the season. But the story, obviously, that people phoned in on, McGonigle looks great. And I'll take it one step further and say that at some point in the next few weeks, as early as the next few weeks, AJ is going to have to make a decision about what the best version of the top of this order looks like. We both like Harry Carpenter. I'm sorry, he's not a leadoff hitter. He's not. Chases too much. It's a different vibe, and I understand the prototype of what a traditional leadoff hitter has changed. The days of get on with a single, steal second base, steal third base, it's much different. Like we have Kyle Schwarber's hit leadoff. These guys hit 50 home runs. At the same time, I need a guy who's seen some pitches, and whether it's Glaber or maybe potentially even McGonigle at that point. But that might be a decision they have to make. But that's a ways down the road. 3 games in, not too high, not too low, but generally speaking, Austin, I came away from it feeling more positive than I did negative.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you covered just about everything that I wanted to touch on here. I mean, of course, I would have loved to have gone 3-0, but if you're starting the season in San Diego, which even if they're trending downwards, they're still a very good team. Have guys like Machado and Tatis and Bogarts and all of these players, and they consistently field competitive teams that are at least, competing to make the playoffs, if not in the playoffs. And, it really could not have started out any better than it did, jumping out to a pretty significant lead. Kevin McGonigle getting that 4-hit day in his first career game. The next game when he was robbed of that home run, my word, Jackson Merrill with just a hell of a play. I was crushed when I saw that. But he will get his first and many more in the games to come. But he has just been an absolute spark plug. Everything you said about how he's battling pitch to pitch and how we haven't seen hitters like this in this lineup for a while. I mean, I completely agree with. He's treating at bats like an art form. Every single pitch, he's changing what he's looking to do. And I know pitching has changed a lot, right? We've got guys throwing harder, focusing on spin rates, and hitting has changed as well to try and adapt to that. Guys focusing on launch angle, 3 true outcomes. They're willing to accept strikeouts in order to be able to hit home runs. But as somebody who played the game for a really long time, I love watching a good hitter that's, focused on winning the battle against the pitcher, whether they draw a walk, whether they just get a single, whatever it is. And it looks like Kevin McGonigle is going to stabilize this offense for quite some time. And I think, you voiced your concerns about, could this team revert back to how they were down the stretch last season where they're not really producing anything. I think someone like Kevin McGonigle, who's able to consistently see pitches and get on base and all of these things, will help prevent that from happening again. And then also to touch on some of the pitchers, Skubal and Valdez, I saw just about everything I'd want to see out of them as that 1-2 punch. Skubal did Skubal things exactly as you said. Valdez, he faced a little bit of traffic. He had some guys getting hits on him, reaching base, but he, worked his way out of it and kept us in the game. The Tigers eventually wound up winning that game. And, he showed to us that he's still very talented and very much a pro. He's been here, he's done that. And so I'm very excited to see them pitch in back-to-back games for the rest of the season. And also, too, Kenley Jansen, he kind of surprised me a little bit when I saw him in his outing. I knew he was still good. I did not know he was still that good. And it's going to be, future Hall of Famer, chasing 500 saves, which is crazy. And the fact that he's still this good really excites me. It's going to be cool to see a guy that is, even if we're not using him in a traditional closer role, which, we have so far, but we know AJ Hinch likes to kind of mix and match things. Regardless of how he uses him, it's going to be really fun to see Kenley Jansen pitch for the Detroit Tigers this season. So, this opening series wasn't perfect, but it was about, as close to perfect as you could get. So, really happy with what we're seeing so far and really pumped to see JV take them out here soon.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. And we do have some more baseball stuff to cover, and we will get to that in segment number 3 as the season is very much underway. We are going to capitalize on our season. Want to talk about something that had been discussed for years and is now a thing in Major League Baseball. We'll talk about that in segment number 3 when we return. Segment number 3 here, it is time for the Major League breakdown. And look, I want to normally spend this segment just talking about, I'm not going to say random, but just things that I've observed throughout Major League Baseball. Maybe sometimes they'll be Tigers related, maybe sometimes they won't be, but we are only one series, technically, for every team, one series into this 2026 season. And I already have extremely strong feelings about this ABS system. And that's where I want to start, because we had a number of moments, one major one with Eugenio Suarez and CB Buckner that went viral over the weekend. So I just, for people who need to get caught up, who've been living under a rock, this season, there is an automated balls and strikes challenge system, meaning that either the pitcher, the catcher, or the hitter can tap their head after a call and say, I'm challenging that call, right? And immediately, similar to what they do with the Hawkeye system in tennis, they check they show it on the big screen. Hey, that ball crossed the plate, or hey, that ball didn't cross the plate in time. And immediately you can overturn the call or not, right? And we saw a few instances in the Tigers game, the third game they played against San Diego, because of course you have a limited number of challenges, in which they would have been right to challenge. McGonigle and Torque had 3-2 pitches that were off the plate that should have been ball 4. Torque was in a situation where it would have loaded the bases. Forgive me, I can't remember exactly what McGonigle's situation is, but I think that there was at least one guy on at the time. No guarantee that the Tigers find a way to win that game, but it definitely would have made things a lot more interesting. This is my roundabout way of saying that I think that now we have, let's just be real, and I saw a tweet about that made me laugh. We have the ability to shame umpires with this. Like the CB Buckner one was embarrassing, right? With Eugenio Suarez. That's back-to-back pitches that got challenged, back-to-back pitches in which the umpire was wrong. I think that baseball has kind of always been the last horse to water with a lot of this new technology, whether it was replay, whether it was challenges, what have you, pace of play stuff that they changed several years back. I'm just going to go on record and say I think that this ABS system and the microscope that was already held pretty close to these umpires, which is now even tighter because of said ABS system, I don't think it's going to last. Not to say that it's going away. I think that within the next 5 years, there will be either an unlimited challenge system or a serious amendment to this system to ensure that these off-the-plate balls are no longer called strikes. Because in that game, in that Tigers game, again, I'm not making excuses. It's not what cost him the game, but I would imagine both Torque and McGonigle, because those were in the early innings, felt to themselves, we're going to need these challenges for later. And the fact is, I don't think that should be the case. I think it should be very similar to the replay system in Major League Baseball, where you have a certain amount of challenges through 7 innings. Everything after the 7th inning or beyond becomes something that can automatically be challenged or automatically be reviewed. It can be umpire's discretion at that point, because the strike zone is more important than it's ever been. Players try to draw more walks. They try to see more pitches, and it is frustrating as hell. I'll speak for the players here rarely, but I know I'm telling the truth. To work a great count, get a pitch that's 6 inches below the strike zone, and you get punched out on it. We're 1 weekend into this, Austin, and I think that I think that how do I put this? The pedal has already been, we've already put the pedal on the metal. Cut this. Sorry. Let me reset here. God. But we are only 1 weekend into this, Austin, and we've already seen multiple instances of people pointing this stuff out, whether it's my team or other teams. This is something that's going to be talked about for the rest of the year, and while I like the ABS system a lot, I already see a universe in which people are clamoring for more quite honestly, because what happens in the third inning can be every bit as influential and impactful to a game as what happens in the eighth or ninth inning. And I think that's something that we're going to need to pay attention to. Look, the deeper we get into the season and we kind of get a sense of who the contenders and pretenders are, we'll talk more about it. And I am going to talk about the Rookie of the Year potential for two guys in the American League Central when we return here in segment number. That'll actually be for the gambling segment because we've had two American League Central rookies that have beat the cover off the ball. But yeah, for this first weekend, this is just something that I wanted to discuss because I can already see the frustration starting to form with our team. And it was all over social media, and it's going to continue to be, which I think is good for the game in a lot of ways. It adds to more discourse, it adds to more discussion, but definitely something worth keeping an eye on. There may be at some point, not this year, but some point in the future, some amendments to this because you just can't miss these calls. We're going to be right back, and then Austin's going to take control for segment number 4. We're going to continue some Tigers talk as we talk about the young core that they currently have. Kevin McGonigle leading the way, but several others down in the minor leagues as well. We will be right back for our I'll Say This segment. This is Big Play Detroit. All right, segment number 4. It's time for our I'll Say This segment. Austin, I'm letting you run point on this one like Elliot Cadeau. Michigan in the Final Four. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. Shooting it over to you. What is your go-to today for today's I'll Say This segment?
I'll say this, Scott Harris needs to lock up the Tigers' young core right now. Now, let me clarify what I mean by the Tigers' young core, because this Tigers roster is still extremely young. There are a lot of guys that you could consider part of their core. But guys like Riley Green, he's somebody who's, even though he's still very young, he's played for a few years now. He's an established player. And so if you were to try and lock him up long term, he's going to want a lot of money. And what that looks like right now, I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if value-wise that would be worth it. We'll have to see if he's a player who winds up being here long term. But there was a blueprint that Scott Harris started to follow, and it seems like he's since backed away from that I thought worked very well for teams like the Atlanta Braves, who wound up winning World Series and wound up locking up a guy, a superstar in Ronald Acuna Jr. for a long time on a very team-friendly contract, plus some other guys as well. They extended Colt Keith before he even played a major league game. And I know some people have had frustrations with Colt Keith, but regardless of, what he's producing, he is an absolute steal on the contract that he's on right now. And I think a lot of people expect him to take steps forward. He's looked pretty good so far since the season has started. And I think that's something that the Tigers should continue to do. Now, the guys who we would be looking at to potentially do that with, of course, immediately coming to mind is Kevin McGonigle. I think they should be working on that as we speak. I think they should do everything they can do to keep him here long term. I think he's the type of hitter that we haven't seen here in a long time, and I think we should keep him and make sure that he is part of the future here in Detroit. You've said before that as much as it would kill you to see Tarik Skubal walk away, that you want to make sure, even if he does, that we are divesting the money that would have gone towards him and putting it in other directions to make this team better. I think Framber Valdez is potentially like a backup to Tarik Skubal if we do lose him, so we're still kind of stabilized in the pitching department. I still think they should do everything they can to try and extend Skubal long term. I think a lot of people, just about every Tiger fan, would be gutted to see him walk away. But if the Tigers front office and ownership are making sure to show fans like, look, we are drafting talented players, we are developing talented players, and we want to stay and be competing here for a long time, showing us that some of these guys that we really like or are really excited about, like a Kevin McGonigle, and giving them contract extensions would be further showing us that they are committed to winning. Now, some other guys that you could look at, Max Clark, he's been somewhat of a controversial figure since spring training has started, which is a lot of it has been ridiculous. We've had him on the show, Chris and Company, super nice dude. The comments about him and wearing chains and all that is just ridiculous to me. But he did struggle a little bit in spring training, but I'm really not all that concerned about it. He's still a very highly touted prospect, shows a lot of promise. And that's a guy where if you were to extend him before he starts his major league career or, shortly after, you could be looking at the returns, years down the line, be like, wow, we got a major steal here. Another one you could be looking at is Jackson Jobe. However, unfortunately with Jackson Jobe, he is a Scott Boras client. And so I don't think that's going to happen. And another thing too about Scott Boras that I feel like a lot of Tigers fans don't really understand is I saw in the offseason, a lot of people were saying, extend Tarek Skubal now or trade him. And there's no chance that Tarek Skubal was going to get extended before he reaches free agency. The way that Scott Boras handles this is he is going to make sure that Tarek Skubal gets to free agency so he can field every offer possible. And it is up to Chris Ilitch to try and put forth an offer to keep him here in Detroit. That's how that's going to go, whether he stays here or not. And I think he wants to stay here. Of course, every athlete is going to say nice things about the place that they play and the fans and all of that. But I mean, he's constantly going to other Detroit teams and Michigan State and Michigan games and all of their games and everything like that. I think it was a very deliberate, sort of media stunt by Scott Boras to kind of parade Tarek Skubal around and be like, look, he wants to be here, so we'll have to see how that plays out. I think we have our doubts that they will bring Tarek Skubal back. Of course, we all want that. But if Jackson Jobe is off the table as well, because he's a Scott Boras client, another pitcher I would be looking at that I think is extremely talented. We still have to wait a little bit until he comes back this season, but that would be Troy Melton. I mean, very young. He's tall, he's long, has some explosive stuff, some really stuff that really dances. And I mean, the fact that he did what he did in this previous postseason, the way that he met the moment was just very, very impressive to me. And so that's, if you were looking to extend a young pitcher long term, that's the kind of guy that I would be looking at. Of course, we all love guys like I mentioned, Riley Green, Kerry Carpenter as well, and some of these other young players. But guys like that who are kind of a few years into their major league career, those are going to be kind of decisions to be made as they're approaching free agency. But I would really like to see Scott Harris get back to that plan it looked like he was starting to follow when he initially extended Colt Keith.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that the first step of this was Colt. It'll be it's funny. I didn't expect this to be the case. It took us one game into Kevin McGonigle's major league career before people were already calling for an extension. And it's one of those things that I'm not mad at people for feeling that way because we know what happens and how much the price goes up. Now, we didn't necessarily know he was going to transform into what he's become, and injuries obviously had a lot to do with this, but you look back, I mean, how different would the trajectory of this franchise be if they would have locked up Tarek in 2022, 2023? It could have been a completely different universe. Now, again, durability, it was a different era, legitimately. I mean, Harris, for some of that, wasn't even here. So I'm not criticizing anyone, but I think it is the way of the future. You talked about it with the Braves. Other teams have worked on it. You want to retain your core guys. It's something that Harris has talked about, and I think it's something that will be entertained. All right, we will be back for our next segment. That'll be Fact or Fiction. Little Lions talk. Lions had, I'm not going to say controversial week, but a little bit of news regarding one of their defensive backs, and we are going to talk about that next. Fact or Fiction. All right, we are back. Segment number 5. It is time for Fact or Fiction here on Big Play Detroit. Got to do a little bit of Lions talk here. And look, this is a jam-packed show. We are going to get to the Pistons, obviously, at some point, and we talked about them quite a bit last week. But you can't, there's only so many hours in the day and only so much showtime here. But we're going to talk a little bit about the Lions. Today's Fact or Fiction. Austin, what do you got?
Fact or Fiction, the Lions secondary will be fine.
Fiction. Fiction. And when you pose this, I I was the one who suggested let's talk a little bit about the Lions secondary. And where this stems from is the fact that I don't want to go into super great detail about this, but Nolan Bianchi did a really remarkable job reporting on this, friend of the program for Chris and Company. Reported on this a few weeks ago, and it's picked up more steam regarding a potential legal situation with Terrion Arnold. It is potentially, like I said, very serious. I don't want to come on here and bash a guy. I really think, especially in this world of social media, we have a tendency to make up our minds on people before the truth ever really comes out. So I'm not coming on here saying that Terrion Arnold is guilty of anything. That's one incident. But let's take it one step further. We don't know if Terrion Arnold's any good, okay? Just at football in the NFL yet. We saw him play a little bit better, but let's not forget the first year and a half, this guy was, if he wasn't the lowest rated corner on PFF, like he was bottom 3, right? And the reason I'm focusing specifically on the secondary is because when you look at what's not gone right at points for the Lions over the last few seasons, and I point specifically to the playoff losses to the 49ers, the playoff loss to the Commanders that we were at Ford Field. You know, a lot of people talk about Ben Johnson's game plans and, oh, they did this wrong. They turned the ball over. And they did. Look, Goff made mistakes in both those games through 2 or 3 picks in the Washington game, including a pick 6. They scored 31 points. Like, what impacted them in those games is that every time they needed a stop, very often on third down, they couldn't get it. Pass rush has something to do with that, but in both the 49er and Commanders games, whether it was Purdy or Jane Daniels, their ability to get out of the pocket, to scramble, created issues for the Lions. But the fact is, I think, and this is where it gets frustrating, I think Brad Holmes noticed that problem. And I think that's why Brad Holmes made the decision to lock up Kirby Joseph and to keep Brian Branch around and say, we have this 1-2 punch of ball hawking safeties that are going to be in this league for a decade. I mean, we got it wrapped up, and Terrion Arnold at that point doesn't even need to be perfect. He just needs to be a suitable DB. And sometimes this game is just very cruel and unfair, and it's cruel and unfair to GMs, because I think if you were to ask any other GM how they would have gone about this, I think they would have applauded Brad Holmes for the way that he went about assembling this roster and assembling this secondary. But the fact is, everything, and I hate to be so negative about it, but everything that I've heard coming out of Kirby Joseph's camp is vague and or negative. It's a lot of, we'll see. Okay, it's going to be, it reminds me a lot of pitchers who have an elbow strain, and we hear about, well, they're throwing off the mound now. Okay, they're playing catch now. And then a few weeks later, you hear about they're getting Tommy John. Like, it is very clear that there's a potential degenerative knee problem. And if that is the case, well, no fault of Kirby, that completely changes his trajectory as a player. That makes him a completely different football player. It might not make him a guy who's even stable enough to see the field. And with Branch, look, he's already going to be out for a good chunk of this season. He'll probably be back, assuming things go right, November? Maybe Achilles injuries, I think, are about a year. So, maybe October. I mean, if everything goes swimmingly, but it's Achilles injury. We've seen those devastate athletes over the last few years, whether it's NBA or NFL. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is that you have an offense that I still think, flaws and all, and I hope that the O-line sees improvements, I still think is a offense capable of making a very deep run in the playoffs. I really do think that. I think in the years in which those back-to-back years where they made it to the NFC Championship and then the next year they win 15 games, they had an offense that was historically good and a defense that would force turnovers and was just good enough at a lot of points. They would bend, they wouldn't break under Aaron Glenn, and they found a way to win a lot of games doing that. But they also had a lot of individual talent, and whether it's because of Kirby Joseph's knee, whether it's because of Brian Branch's Achilles injury, or whatever the heck is going on with Terrion Arnold, what you need to fix your defense, especially your secondary, and I know they've made some moves. You bring Yasin back, okay, sure, but I just don't think it's enough that you can solve in one offseason. And the offensive core isn't getting any younger. So I hate to be so down and pessimistic about it, but when I look at this Lions team right now, do I still see a competitive product? Yeah, absolutely. A team that has this kind of offense and these weapons is always going to be able to score points. But I think it's something that the media has pointed out here in this state, and I think they're correct. It's a lot of lateral movement. You've made changes, but you haven't necessarily made changes for the better. And I don't know if you've done enough to address, if not your biggest issue, one of your top two biggest issues, which is your secondary. And that issue is only going to kind of expand as the future becomes more and more uncertain for Joseph and Branch. So we'll be back. Tough to look. It's difficult, but some we had to address there as the Lions continue to kind of just flounder here, unfortunately, during this offseason. We'll talk about them a little bit more in the future. But when we come back, we're going to be doing our betting segment. I want to talk about Kevin McGonigle and Rookie of the Year odds in the American League because, as is, I feel like, very often the case, there's another guy in the AL Central who got off to a crazy hot start, and I do just want to talk about that as we continue to march forward here. Final segment coming up next. It is Big Play Detroit. FanDuel, the tournament is here. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get up to $300 back in bonus bets every day for 10 days. Here's how it works. Place a tournament bet using the token, and if it doesn't win, you'll get up to $300 back in bonus bets every single day for 10 straight days. That's 10 chances to play all tournament long, from game props and money lines to spreads, totals, futures, and more. You can mix things up with same-game parlays for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to fill your bracket, FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the action day after day. So visit FanDuel.com/BigPlay to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/BigPlay to get in on the action. 21 plus select states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino. 18 plus DC in Kentucky and Wyoming. Bonus bets are non-withdrawable and expire after 7 days. Tokens are received in increments of 1 per day. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. Call 1-888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org/chat for Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org for Maryland. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 1-800-327-5050 for Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY for New York, or call 1-877-770-7867 for Louisiana. All right, welcome back, everybody. It is time for our final segment here today as we talk about our gambling segment, brought to you by FanDuel. We're talking about Rookie of the Year odds. We're talking about Rookie of the Year odds specifically for Kevin McGonigle. Now, last I checked, and this was, I think, before the Saturday game, so I don't know how much has changed, in the last 24 hours. Plus 500 odds to win Rookie of the Year on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. I'll be honest, even with his hot start, kind of a steal. I mean, I'm not expecting, there's so many rookies out there, I'm not expecting an overwhelming favorite, but the reason I want to talk about this right now is because this is probably your final chance to get Kevin McGonigle at really good odds in terms of a futures bet for American League Rookie of the Year. Simply because this week, and I have to bring attention to this, and I'm sure our the people over at Big Play Cleveland will love to hear this as well, but Chase DeLauter, who made his major league debut in the playoffs last year, started a game against Detroit in that series that Detroit won, has gotten off to a crazy hot start. As of the time of this recording, 4 home runs in 3 games. DeLauter, I think, is going to be a wonderful major league player, and he's going to hit a lot of home runs. I think that swing is a bit wonky and has potential to have holes carved in it at some point here in the future. And every year there is that rookie that people jump on for the futures bet in the first month of the season. We went through it twice, or not twice. We went through it. I was going to say Chris Shelton wasn't technically a rookie, but Badu 5 years ago, where it was like, this guy's taking over baseball and he can do no wrong. And the fact is, very often when it comes to Rookie of the Year voting, consistency is the most important thing. And I think McGonigle is, one, going to be playing pretty much every day, whether it's at third or short. And secondly, I talk all the time about how tough of a game this is. And we've seen guys who had transcendent rookie seasons that took steps back in their sophomore campaign, not necessarily because they did anything wrong, but just because the league became adapted to them. Gunnar Henderson took a step back offensively. Corbin Carroll in his second year took a step back offensively. Now, those guys are continuing to be some of the best players in baseball because they, in turn, have adapted to other people's adaptation. The point I'm trying to make is that I think these odds for McGonigle are excellent because you can't go wrong with a guy that, one, doesn't have many holes in his swing, has close to an 80 grade hit tool, and two, a guy who very rarely, if ever, is going to get himself out. And for a rookie, that is invaluable because it's very rare that you say that about nowadays. Any rookie you call up, you say to yourself, well, he's probably going to strike out a fair amount. The fact that you have a guy who's going to be a contact guy who's probably going to be playing, assuming he's healthy, 150 to 160 games, quite frankly. I mean, at this point in his career, why not give him the reps? That's going to be a contact guy who's going to get on base at plus 500 right now, one weekend into the season. He's going to be given the opportunity, and that'll be the last point that I'll make. Very often, rookies have to kind of fight their way into consistent playing time. That's not the case. It's pretty rare that you get a rookie who starts the year in the opening day lineup, gets 4 hits in his major league debut. I mean, talk about setting a pace for yourself. I think it's a legitimate possibility, and I would take those odds right now on FanDuel because they're probably not going to get much better for a guy who really burst onto the scene this opening weekend against the San Diego Padres. All right, well, that will do it for. I'm going to call it. I feel like this is one of those sitcoms. I'm going to call it a very special episode of Big Play Detroit, as not every day you get a chance to talk about your college basketball team playing in the Final Four. And we had a chance to lead off with that today, Michigan, obviously. And hopefully, look, the next time we record, and Austin, I'll talk about this with you off the air, but I hope the next time we record is after Monday, because it means that Michigan will have played in and potentially won the national championship. Still going to soak this moment in for what it's worth. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. Follow this show on X as well. That's at Big Play Detroit. We are also on TikTok as well, at Chris Castellani for my personal page, at Big Play Detroit for the TikTok account. And all of our content, whether it's Chris and Company or post-game videos, can be found at castellanicontent.com. That's getting updated all the time. Told Austin this. We're going to take a few weeks off from Chris and Company. Nothing wrong. Just want to recharge a little bit, get some good guests, and make sure that we're coming back strong. And I also just want to make sure that my primary focus is on this show because it's very important to me, and we'll continue to roll things out. But yeah, thanks so much for the support. Austin, plug your socials, and let's get out of here.
Yeah. At Austin Sisler on X, at Austin Sisler _20 on Instagram. Got link trees in both bios with YouTube channel, portfolio. Some of the stuff that Chris and I do that doesn't necessarily make it up on his channel goes on mine or the portfolio, things like that. I want to thank everybody at Big Play and FanDuel for giving us this platform. This has been a lot of fun so far. Looking forward to next week, and be sure to check out Chris's channel if you want to go through. We've done a ton of interviews with a ton of really great guests: Tigers, Lions, Michigan State. So be sure to check that out.
Yep, and we appreciate our audience as well as we continue to try to grow this brand. Only 3 episodes in, but the support has been there, and we're going to continue to try to put out the best product possible. Appreciate everyone. We will talk to you again next week. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.